This video is going to be about Not That Kind of Girl by Lena Dunham. It may seem like I'm a little behind the times talking about this now, but I did read it when it first came out in like October or whenever that was, and since then I have just not had the will or the motivation or the need to talk about it or the ability to coherently put together thoughts, and I'm barely there now, but it's time to just do this. Firstly, this is a collection of personal essays, and I think it is important to recognize that it's really hard to present your life in fragments, especially when you're putting it out into a very hypercritical space. And this is something that Roxane Gay actually mentioned in a post she did on her Tumblr addressing criticism about this book and kind of Lena Dunham just in general. I also think that Lena is actually a lot smarter than she's represented in her work, if that makes any sense. Before I read this book, I listened to a couple interviews because I was pretty hyped up, thought it was going to be really good, and she kind of talks about the three main criticisms of her show, Girls. So the first one she talks about is people criticizing how she uses her body in the show because she is often naked. Her response to this is that she's not politicizing everything, it's that her body is politicized by other people because her body isn't the norm. And Wronglit has talked about this before in one of her other videos about how Lena Dunham has been really good in Girls with being able to show love on other body types. And I think that that is really important, and I think it's probably like the really only good thing that the show has done, or the message that it has given out. And the other major criticism is the complete lack of diversity and how whitewashed her show is. And her response to this criticism is that life experiences that she knows and she feels comfortable writing about are WASPs and Jewish people. So she said, like, that's what I wrote. I wrote 2 WASPs and 2 Jewish people. And she kind of talked about that criticism as drawing it into the larger discussion about the lack of diversity just on TV and the media generally, and how there is a need for more perspectives to be included. And she said that she's made more efforts, but I don't know. I haven't watched the latest season of Girls because I can't. One of the criticisms that I have, but I actually haven't really heard that much about, is the representation of queer characters. So on the show, again, I haven't watched the new season, so maybe it's different. The only consistent non-straight person they have on the show is the stereotypical white, attractive, flamboyant gay man. There's nothing wrong with like fitting that stereotype at all, but it's really harmful to only represent gay men that way. And I really disliked how there was an instance in the storyline where the character Elijah kind of thinks that maybe he's bisexual, you know, maybe it's not as set in stone as he thought he was or whatever, and they're just kind of like, you can't go back to being confused. You're finally who you are, like, don't go back to that weird semi-closeted space. And I'm like, that's not how that works. That's not what... Do you know what a bisexual is? So now to actually talk about the book. I will say though, I am glad that I read the book before I watched Girls, because it helped me understand her motivations for having certain storylines and plots in the show. The book itself just kind of made me feel uncomfortable, and not like the good kind of uncomfortable where you feel like you're being like pushed out of your comfort zone and your worldview is being challenged. It was just written in this like swirl of vagueness, and she just expected you to know where she was in her life because it was non-chronological, but I had no context to arrive at a conclusion if she was trying to say something in the particular essay. This book also made me feel uneasy. She just seemed kind of oblivious, and I don't know if this was just maybe more apparent in the essays where she was kind of writing about herself when she was younger, so she was just, you know, being truthful and writing what she thought as a young person, but at the same time she wasn't like questioning or being critical of how she was thinking then. She would just say really unnecessary things, criticizing girls for having boyfriends that looked like they were lesbians, or saying things like, I'm tired of bisexuals. People keep being like, this book is so honest, but I'm like, a lot of it's just her being rude. Like, that's not like groundbreaking. It just feels like she doesn't get it almost. I don't know, because like there was this one brilliant moment of self-awareness. She was talking about when she was going to camp and she was sitting on the bus ready to go and she was kind of nervous about it. And she was like, but hey, that's what camp's for, meeting different types of white girls. Amazing. A moment of self-awareness. And I was like, that's great. If she had been like that for the rest of her book, it would have been good. But it was just so oblivious and unquestioning, and there were some things that I liked about the book though. The writing style was good. There were some funny parts. Her essays on body image and eating were like the most relatable thing I've ever read in my entire life. And the death chapter was good, but the end of the book was just so unsubstantial. And this is something that Emma from Emma Reads talked about in her video, which I'll link below. That was actually one of the first videos I ever watched of hers. And look at us now. So there are so many hints at her work and her career, but she never actually talks about it, which is infuriating because that would be very interesting to actually read about. Instead, she spends like an entire section talking about her experiences at camp. It just felt like there was so much missing. Yeah. The reason I'm like so conflicted and torn and just don't even know what my real feelings are on this is that on the one hand, I want to like her. Like she's a young woman who's already made her own film, who's writing, acting in, and producing her own TV show. Like that's awesome. And the show has some good things that come out of it. And the point of her show it's not supposed to be groundbreaking. It's just supposed to be like a Seinfeldian kind of account of some girls living in New York. But then at the same time, how did you even think it was okay to have a completely whitewashed show, especially set in New York? Like, what were you even thinking? And I think that's the bigger thing, is that from what I've seen, she just seems to be very oblivious, not very aware, and tapped into a lot of stuff. And then of course there's the biggest controversy about this book of all, and that is if she sexually assaulted her younger sister or not, which is something that's kind of detailed about when her and her sister were younger. That one is also a bit like, because on one hand, even like Roxane Gay said in her post, was like, this book would have gone through so many lawyers. Her sister read her book. Her and her sister are close now, so, and her sister has said that she didn't feel like she was sexually assaulted. But then I've seen other posts and other kind of like interviews and articles about her sister saying that she felt like owned by her as a child. But another thing that I realized through like reading through other posts and articles is how much white privilege Lena Dunham is experiencing during this controversy, because there was a lot of negative attention about this. We have a history of really softening allegations and actual crimes that have happened by white people. This happens all the time. There's no way that a person of color could have gotten away with that. Like, there just isn't. That would have never happened. So like, that is so not okay, and I don't think that she gets to be a feminist icon. Like, she just doesn't. But something I do find interesting about this is there's obviously the instance where she inappropriately touched her sister. Along with that, people were lumping in where Lena would masturbate when she was in the same bed as like her sleeping sister. One of the things I just kind of want to point out that makes me a little bit like, what? Is that in How to Build a Girl by Caitlin Moran, really the first page of that book is the main character masturbating while her brother is like sleeping on the other side of the bed. And I've heard nothing about that. So I don't know. Like, I'm very